Hi, I'm Josh Jacob, consultant orthopedic surgeon. This is my colleague Mr. Ash Unithan, also a consultant orthopedic surgeon, and we're here at the BMI Runnymede Hospital in the operating theatre setting. Today we'd like to talk about wrist fractures. It's a very common injury, often affecting old people and also young kids who come off trampolines, monkey bars and so on and so forth. Now tell me, Mr. Unithan, who's particularly at risk at getting wrist fractures?
The most subgroup of patients which we see are patients who have got some amount of osteoporosis, and by definition we call it a fragility fracture. My mother-in-law had a wrist fracture. We advise you not to call her old. So let's rebrand the fracture as a fracture that happens in people who are experienced living in this world. Going back to the wrist fracture, osteoporosis or brittle bone plays an important role in fractures, and the history is normal fall from height and falling onto the hand, and that is the most bulk of the wrist fractures we see. Obviously you can see, as Mr. Jacob said, in younger population and also in middle-aged population, depending upon the mechanism of injury. So now Mr. Jacob, how would you treat a wrist fracture?
So generally start with the history and make sure it is a wrist fracture. The deformity is fairly self-explanatory. It's often called a dinner fork deformity, or the technical word would be a Colles fracture, named after a man called Abraham Colles. There are various types of fractures and displacements that we don't have time to go into detail, but once I've ascertained that the fracture is sufficiently displaced and off-ended, then they need to be stabilized. If the fracture is minimally displaced, or just a crack, or just a break which hasn't displaced, all meaning the same thing, then we can...
I say the crack, break, hairline crack all means the same thing?
Then we can actually just hold it in place with a nice molded plaster of Paris cast. Cast is usually worn for anything between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the type of fracture, depending on the quality of bone and the motivation of the patient. And roughly around about 4 to 6 weeks, I'll take it out, put them in a temporary splint, and also get them moving. The fingers are prone to get stiff, the shoulder gets stiff in sympathy to the wrist fracture, and so we want to make sure that while the arm is being immobilized in a cast, then once the cast is removed, that they get moving straight away. Now, with regard to surgical fixation, it's usually wires or plates and screws. What do you want to take over there?
Yeah, so depending upon the fracture pattern, if the fracture is quite complicated fracture which involves the wrist joint as such, in my practice I would put a plate which goes on the inside of your hand, and you probably will not feel the plate because it's a very low contour plate. You will have a scar in front of your wrist. It roughly, give or take, it is about 5 centimeter scar, and you will be in a plaster for about 2 weeks, or if your bone quality is really good, you will have no plaster at all, and you will straight away start mobilization.